Chapter 1. The Stranger at the Gate. The fog clung to St. Mary Mead like a jealous lover, wrapping the village in a damp grey shroud. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes sharp as they traced the faint shapes moving beyond the garden gate. It was late October, and the evenings had grown heavy with the promise of secrets. She heard the stumble before she saw it, a ragged gasp, the scrape of boots on gravel. A man, hunched and unsteady, lurched against her gate. His coat was torn, his face pale as bone under the gaslight. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her heart quickening not with fear, but with curiosity. In St. Mary Mead, strangers were rare, and dying ones rarer still. Help! His voice was a rasp, barely audible over the wind. He collapsed before she could reach him, his body crumpling like a discarded puppet. By the time Miss Marple, wrapped in her shawl, knelt beside him, his breath was shallow, his eyes wild with urgency. "Who are you?" she asked gently, her voice steady despite the chill seeping through her knees. He clutched her hand, his fingers cold as marble. "The lark sings at midnight," he whispered, each word a struggle. "But the key is under the rose." His eyes locked on hers, pleading, then dimmed. A final shudder, and he was gone. Miss Marple sat back, her mind already turning. The man's words were no delirium. They were a message, deliberate and precise. She studied his face. Weathered, perhaps 40, with a scar above his left brow. His coat pocket yielded a single item, a crumpled photograph of a young woman, her smile bright, but her eyes guarded. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "E.R. 1942. The village was stirring now. Mrs. Price, the butcher's wife, peered from her window, her face a mask of nosy concern. "Miss Marple, is he dead?" she called, already halfway down the lane. "Quite dead, I'm afraid," Miss Marple replied, rising. "Fetch Dr. Haydock, and tell Constable Reed to come at once." As Mrs. Price scurried off, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the stranger. "The lark sings at midnight, but the key is under the rose." The words looped in her mind, sharp and tantalizing. She knew better than to dismiss them as nonsense. In her experience, dying men rarely wasted their breath. Dr. Haydock arrived, his face grim as he examined the body. "Stabbed," he muttered, pointing to a dark stain beneath the man's ribs. "Died of blood loss, likely within the hour. No identification, but he's not local. Constable Reed, young and eager, scribbled notes. Any idea who he was, Miss Marple?" "Not yet," she said, her tone mild but her eyes gleaming. "But he had something to say before he passed, something rather curious." Reed frowned, clearly expecting more, but Miss Marple only smiled. She would not share the stranger's words. Not yet. They were a puzzle, and she intended to solve it herself. As the body was carried away, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the photograph tucked safely in her pocket. The fog had thickened, blurring the world beyond her window. But in her mind, The first threads of the mystery were already weaving together. Who was he, she wondered, settling back into her chair? And what secret was worth dying for? Chapter 2. The Village Whispers. The morning after the stranger's death, St. Mary Mead buzzed with gossip as predictably as bees in a clover field. Miss Jane Marple, sipping her tea at the kitchen table, could almost hear the whispers threading through the village. A dead man at Miss Marple's gate, stabbed, they say, and not one of us, oh no, a stranger. She smiled faintly. Gossip, in her experience, was a clumsy but useful tool, less for its truth than for what it revealed about the tellers. She adjusted her spectacles and examined the photograph again. The young woman, ER 1942, gazed back with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about her features tugged at Miss Marple's memory, but the connection eluded her, like a name forgotten on the tip of the tongue. She slipped the photograph into her handbag, donned her best hat, and set out for the village shop. If answers were to be found, they would hide in the chatter of St. Mary Mead's busybodies. The shop, run by the perpetually flustered Miss Hartnell, was a hive of activity. Villagers milled about, ostensibly buying flour or stamps, but really trading theories about the dead man. Miss Marple lingered by the tinned peaches, her ears attuned to the hum of conversation. Heard he was a spy, mark my words, Mrs. Price was saying, her voice low but carrying. Why else skulk about in the fog, stabbed like that? Nonsense, snapped Miss Weatherby, her pinched face sour. Probably a thief, running from his own kind. We don't need that sort here. Miss Marple noted their tones, Mrs. Price's relish, Miss Weatherby's indignation. Neither seemed grieved, only excited by the drama. But then, across the shop, she caught a different reaction. Young Clara Reed, the constable's sister, stood by the counter, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Her face was pale, her eyes darting, as if expecting someone to pounce. Interesting, Miss Marple thought. Clara was usually cheerful, but today she looked like a mouse caught in a trap. Miss Marple, Miss Hartnell bustled over, her apron dusted with flour. What a dreadful business at your gate. Did you see anything suspicious? Only a poor man in need of help, Miss Marple said mildly, her eyes still on Clara. Though he did say something curious before he passed, about a lark and a rose. Quite poetic, don't you think? The shop fell silent for a heartbeat. Mrs. Price's mouth opened, then shut. Miss Weatherby sniffed, but her fingers tightened on her basket. Clara dropped her handkerchief, her face flushing as she bent to retrieve it. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver. She hadn't expected answers, only reactions, and these were telling indeed. Larks and roses, Miss Hartnell said, recovering. Sounds like nonsense to me. Poor soul, probably out of his mind. Perhaps, Miss Marple murmured, selecting a tin of biscuits. But I find dying words often mean more than we think. As she paid, she glanced at Clara, who was now edging toward the door. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple called, her voice gentle but firm. Might I have a word?" Clara froze, her eyes wide. I'm late for work, Miss Marple," she stammered. "At the vicarage, you know." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "Another time, then." But she made a mental note. Clara's fear was no mere nerves. She knew something, or thought she did. Outside, Miss Marple paused by the war memorial, her mind sifting through the morning's observations. The villagers' excitement was expected, but Clara's panic was a thread worth pulling. And then there was the photograph. ER, 1942. The date suggested wartime, a time of secrets and sacrifice. Could the stranger's words with their talk of larks and roses point to something from those dark years? She was about to head home when she spotted Mr. Clement, the vicar, hurrying across the green. His face was troubled, his usual geniality replaced by a frown. "Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his hat. "A terrible thing, this death. I trust you're not too shaken?" "Not at all," she replied, studying him. "Though I wonder if you've heard anything unusual. The man mentioned a lark singing at midnight. Does that mean anything to you?" The vicar's eyes flickered just for a moment before he shook his head. "Not a thing, I'm afraid. Sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? Well, I must be off parish duties." He hurried away, his steps a touch too quick. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind humming. The vicar was a kind man, but even kind men had secrets. And in St. Mary Mead, secrets had a way of surfacing, whether their keepers liked it or not. She turned toward home, the stranger's words echoing in her thoughts. "The lark sings at midnight, but the key is under the rose." Somewhere in those words lay the truth, and Miss Marple was determined to find it. Chapter 3. The Lark's Song. The afternoon sun did little to warm St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a cup of tea cooling beside her. The stranger's words, "The lark sings at midnight, but the key is under the rose," had taken root in her mind, sprouting questions like weeds. She sensed a rhythm to them, a coded meaning that pointed to something specific. And with the photograph marked ER, 1942, still nagging at her memory, she suspected the past held the answer. Miss Marple's knowledge of human nature was vast, but her grasp of history was equally sharp. The year 1942 placed the photograph squarely in the Second World War, a time when St. Mary Mead had been a quiet refuge for evacuees and soldiers on leave. The phrase, "lark sings at midnight," felt like a wartime reference, perhaps a signal, a code, or even a password. She resolved to start there. Her first stop was the village library, a cramped room above the post office, tended by Miss Emily Barton, a spinster whose memory for local history rivalled Miss Marple's own. Miss Barton, with her bird-like frame and fluttering hands, greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, come to escape the gossip about that dreadful business?" "Not quite," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm curious about something. During the war, Were there any unusual activities in the village? Signals, perhaps, or coded messages?" Miss Barton's hands stilled, her gaze sharpening. "Coded messages? My goodness, that's specific. Well, St. Mary Mead was quiet, but we had our share of wartime intrigue. There were rumours of resistance fighters passing through, French mostly, working with the SOE. They used all sorts of codes. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple hesitated, then decided on partial truth. "The poor man who died mentioned a lark singing at midnight. It struck me as deliberate." Miss Barton's eyes widened. "A lark at midnight? That's curious. Larks don't sing at night, you know. Skylarks are daytime birds. But wait." She bustled to a shelf, pulling down a dusty ledger labelled Village Records, 1940, 1945. There was something about a lark. Let me see. She flipped through pages, muttering, "Here." In 42, the Home Guard reported strange lights on the hill at midnight near Rose Cottage. They called it the lark's signal, because it flickered like a bird's call, short, then long. Thought it might be smugglers, but it stopped after a few weeks. Nothing came of it. "Rose Cottage," Miss Marple repeated, her pulse quickening. The stranger's words mentioned a rose. Coincidence? She doubted it. Who lived there then? "Old Mrs. Harrow," Miss Barton said. "She passed in 43. The cottage stood empty after that, though I heard it was used by the military for a bit. Storage, they said." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Some whispered it was more than that, a meeting place for spies, but you know how people talk." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Rose Cottage, lights at midnight, a possible wartime connection. It was a thread worth pulling. "Thank you, Emily. You've been most helpful." As she left the library, she decided to visit Rose Cottage herself. It lay on the village's edge, a squat stone building half swallowed by ivy. The current tenant, Mr. Grayson, was a reclusive artist who'd moved in a year ago, rarely seen except at the pub. Miss Marple wondered what he might know or hide. The walk was brisk, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. Rose Cottage looked neglected, its garden overgrown, its windows dark. She knocked, but no answer came. Peering through a window, she saw only shadows and dust. Yet something caught her eye, a faint carving on the door frame, a rose, its petals crudely etched. Her fingers traced it, and she felt a thrill of certainty. The key is under the rose. She was about to investigate further when footsteps crunched behind her. Turning, she saw Clara Reed, the constable's sister, standing at the gate. Her face was ashen, her hands clenched. "Miss Marple!" Clara's voice was shrill. "What are you doing here?" "Merely taking a walk," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, but her eyes keen. "And you, dear? You seem upset." Clara's gaze darted to the cottage, then away. I was just passing by. I work at the vicarage, you know, and this is my shortcut." Her words tumbled out too fast, her fingers twisting her scarf. "Of course," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Though it's a curious place, isn't it? So many stories about Rose Cottage. Wartime secrets, they say." Clara flinched, her eyes wide. "I wouldn't know about that," she said, backing away. "I have to go." She hurried off, nearly tripping in her haste. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Clara's fear, the vicar's unease, the wartime lights at Rose Cottage. It all pointed to a secret buried in the village's past, and the stranger, with his dying words, had known it. As she walked home, the wind carried the faint cry of a bird. A lark, perhaps, though it was far too late in the day. Miss Marple's lips curved. The lark's song was leading her somewhere, and she was determined to follow. Chapter 4. Under the Rose. The evening settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, the stars obscured by clouds that promised rain. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the gathering chill, sat at her desk with a notepad, the stranger's words scrawled in her neat hand. "The lark sings at midnight, but the key is under the rose." The carving on Rose Cottage's doorframe, a crude rose, had confirmed her suspicion. The rose was no mere metaphor. It was a place, a marker. But a key, that remained elusive, and Miss Marple was not one to let a puzzle linger unsolved. She decided to return to Rose Cottage under cover of darkness. Daylight visits were all well and good, but secrets, like moths, preferred the night. Bundling herself in a dark coat and scarf, she slipped out, her steps silent on the damp grass. The village was quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a shutter. Miss Marple moved with purpose, her senses alert. Rose Cottage loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the clouded sky. The garden was a tangle of thorns and shadows, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Miss Marple approached the door, her fingers brushing the carved rose. She knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees, and probed the ground beneath the doorstep. The soil was loose, recently disturbed. Her heart quickened as her fingers grazed something hard. A small metal box, no larger than a cigarette case, caked in dirt. She pried it open, revealing a brass key, its surface etched with a tiny lark. "The key is under the rose." She slipped it into her pocket, her mind racing. What did it unlock? A door, a safe, a secret. Before she could ponder further, a twig snapped behind her. Miss Marple froze, her breath catching. Slowly she turned, her eyes scanning the darkness. A figure stood at the garden's edge, half hidden by the ivy. Tall, male, his face obscured. For a moment neither moved, the silence taut as a wire. "Who's there?" Miss Marple called, her voice steady despite the pulse in her throat. The figure bolted, crashing through the undergrowth toward the woods. Miss Marple, practical as ever, knew pursuit was futile. She was no sprinter. Instead, she memorized the figure's gait. Long strides, slightly uneven, favouring the left leg. She'd know him if she saw him again. Returning home, she locked the door and examined the key under her lamp. Its craftsmanship suggested age. its lark engraving a deliberate echo of the stranger's words. She recalled Miss Barton's tale of wartime lights at Rose Cottage, the whispers of spies. Could the key belong to that era, unlocking a relic of those shadowed days? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Constable Reed, his young face etched with worry. "Miss Marple, sorry to disturb you so late. It's about Clara." "Clara?" Miss Marple's brows lifted. "Is she all right?" "She's gone," Reed said, his voice tight. "Left a note at the vicarage saying she was visiting family in London, but she's got no family there. I checked, and she was acting strange all day, ever since that man died." Miss Marple's mind flashed to Clara's panic at Rose Cottage, her darting eyes in the shop. "Did she say anything unusual?" she asked. Reed hesitated. "She kept muttering about midnight and not being safe. I thought she was just nervous, but now—" He trailed off, his hands clenched. "Thank you, Tom," Miss Marple said gently. "I'll keep an eye out, and you mustn't worry too much. Clara may simply need time." But as Reed left, Miss Marple's calm facade hid a growing certainty. Clara's disappearance was no coincidence. She knew something about the lark, the rose, or the key, something that had driven her to flee. Or worse, someone had driven her away. Miss Marple sat back, the key glinting in her palm, the stranger's death, the wartime clues, Clara's fear, the figure in the garden. It was all connected, a tapestry of secrets with Rose Cottage at its centre. She thought of the photograph, ER, 1942, and that nagging sense of familiarity. Tomorrow she would visit the vicar. His unease yesterday had not escaped her, and vicars, she knew, often heard more than they told. As she retired to bed, the wind howled outside, carrying the faint, eerie cry of a bird. Miss Marple closed her eyes, the key safe beneath her pillow. The lark was singing, and she was listening. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The morning dawned grey and restless, the sky over St. Mary Mead bruised with clouds. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a pot of strong tea, tucked the lark-edged key into her handbag alongside the photograph of ER 1942. Clara Reed's disappearance weighed on her mind, as did the shadowy figure at Rose Cottage. But it was the vicar's fleeting unease that drew her now. Mr. Clement, with his kind eyes and guarded manner, knew more than he'd let on, and Miss Marple was determined to coax it out. She found him in the church, polishing the brass candlesticks with a vigour that suggested distraction. The air smelled of wax and old wood, and the stained-glass windows cast muted colours across his face. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his smile a touch too quick. "Come to help with the altar flowers?" "Not today, I'm afraid," she said, settling into a pew. "I've come about the stranger, and his words. They've been troubling me." The vicar's cloth paused mid-polish. "His words?" he echoed, his tone cautious. "The lark sings at midnight," she said, watching him closely. "And something about a rose. It's curious, don't you think? Almost like a message from the war years." Mr. Clement's fingers tightened on the cloth, his knuckles whitening. "The war," he said softly, as if the word itself were heavy. "A difficult time, so many secrets, so much loss." He met her gaze, and for a moment she saw not the vicar, but a younger man, haunted by memories. "You were here then?" Miss Marple prompted gently. "At Rose Cottage, perhaps. I hear it was significant." He hesitated, then sighed, setting the cloth aside. "You don't miss much, do you, Jane?" His use of her first name startled her, a rare familiarity. "Yes, I was here in 42, not as vicar yet, just a curate, helping where I could. Rose Cottage was a meeting place of sorts, for people who needed to move quietly." "Resistance fighters?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded barely. "And others? They used signals, lights, codes. Lark was one of their words, I think. I didn't ask questions. It wasn't safe to know too much." His eyes drifted to the window, where a saint gazed down in silent judgment. "But there was a girl, Elizabeth. She helped them." Miss Marple's breath caught. "E.R. Elizabeth? Who?" she asked, though a memory was stirring sharp and painful. "Elizabeth Randall," he said. "A local girl, brave but reckless. She disappeared in 42 after an incident at Rose Cottage. Some said she ran off, others that she was killed. I never knew the truth." Miss Marple's hand crept to her handbag, where the photograph lay. Elizabeth Randall. The name unlocked a door in her mind, and through it stepped a girl from her youth, lively, defiant, with a smile like the one in the photograph. Elizabeth had been a distant cousin, visiting St. Mary Mead during the war. Miss Marple had last seen her at a village dance, laughing with soldiers, her eyes bright with secrets. Then she was gone, leaving only rumours. "Elizabeth," Miss Marple murmured, her voice thick. "I knew her long ago, and you, Henry, you cared for her, didn't you?" The vicar flinched, his face raw. "I did," he admitted, "but she chose another path. A dangerous one. When she vanished, I thought. I hoped she'd found safety. But now, with this stranger, I wonder." Miss Marple's mind raced. The photograph, the key, the stranger's words, all tied to Elizabeth Randall and Rose Cottage. Had the stranger known her? Was his death revenge for a wartime betrayal, or something else entirely? And Clara, had she stumbled onto the same secret? Did Elizabeth ever mention a key? Miss Marple asked. Or a lark singing at midnight? Mr. Clement shook his head. Not to me, but she was involved with a group, a society they called it. They guarded something, though I never knew what. After she disappeared, the meeting stopped. Rose Cottage went quiet. A society, Miss Marple repeated, her thoughts sharpening. A clandestine group, a hidden artifact, a girl lost to time. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. As she rose to leave, the vicar caught her arm. "Jane, be careful. If this is about Elizabeth, it's not just the past you're stirring. Someone killed that man, and Clara's gone. They're watching." "I'm always careful, Henry," she said, her smile serene, but her eyes steel. "Thank you for your candour." Outside, the wind tugged at her hat, and she clutched her handbag tightly. Elizabeth Randall's face swam before her, merging with the stranger's dying gaze. The key in her pocket felt heavier now, a link to a cousin she'd failed to save. But failure was not final, not yet. Miss Marple would find the truth, for Elizabeth, for Clara, for the stranger. As she walked home, a shadow moved across the green, too quick to identify. She didn't turn, but her senses sharpened. The vicar was right. Someone was watching, and Miss Marple intended to see them first. Chapter 6. The Secret Society. The rain arrived in St. Mary Mead by noon, a steady drizzle that turned the lanes to mud and kept the curious indoors. Miss Jane Marple, however, was not so easily deterred. The vicar's revelation about Elizabeth Randall and the mysterious society at Rose Cottage had lit a fire in her. The lark-etched key, the photograph, and the stranger's cryptic words all pointed to a secret that had outlived the war and claimed lives to protect itself. Clara Reed's disappearance only heightened the urgency. Miss Marple sensed the net tightening, and she would not be caught unprepared. Her next move was to consult an old friend, Colonel Bantry, whose wartime service in military intelligence might shed light on the society Mr. Clement had mentioned. The Bantry's home, Gossington Hall, was a short walk, and Miss Marple arrived just as the Colonel was grumbling over a soggy newspaper. "Jane," he boomed, ushering her into the drawing-room, "what brings you out in this deluge? Not that dead fellow, I hope." "Precisely him," she said, settling by the fire, "and a matter from the war. Tell me, Arthur, did you ever hear of a group in St. Mary Mead, perhaps a secret society, connected to resistance efforts? They used Rose Cottage and spoke of larks." Colonel Bantry's bushy brows shot up. "Good Lord, you don't pull punches, do you?" He poured her a sherry, though she barely sipped it. "A society, eh? Well, I wasn't stationed here in '42, but I heard whispers. There was a cell, unofficial, mind you, called the Order of the Lark. Not quite SOE, but aligned. They smuggled intelligence, sometimes people, through rural networks. Rose Cottage was a safe house, or so the rumours went." "The Order of the Lark," Miss Marple repeated, her pulse quickening. "What did they guard?" Bantry frowned, swirling his glass. "That's where it gets murky. Some said it was documents, codes maybe, or names of double agents. Others claimed it was an artifact, something the Nazis wanted badly. A relic, perhaps, or a prototype. Whatever it was, it vanished when the group dissolved. One of their leaders, a young woman, went missing around then. Tragic business. Elizabeth Randall," Miss Marple said softly. Bantry started. "You knew her?" "A cousin," she admitted, her voice steady but her heart aching. "And the stranger who died, he spoke of a lark and a key. I found a key, Arthur, hidden at Rose Cottage, etched with a lark." Bantry's face darkened. "Jane, you're wading into deep waters. If that key's tied to the order, it's dangerous. People killed for it back then, and your stranger proves they still do." He leaned forward, his voice low. "There's talk, old talk, that the order never fully disbanded. A few members stayed guarding their secret. If they're still here—" Miss Marple's mind raced. A secret society lingering in St. Mary Mead, protecting a wartime relic. The vicar's unease, Clara's fear, the figure in the garden, they all fit. But who were the members? And what did Clara know that made her run? "Thank you, Arthur," she said, rising. "You've given me much to think about." "Be careful, Jane," he called as she left. "The past has teeth." The rain had eased as Miss Marple 10, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. She hurried home, the key burning in her pocket. If the Order of the Lark still existed, its members were among her neighbours, hiding in plain sight. She thought of Mr. Grayson, the reclusive artist at Rose Cottage, whose limp matched the figure she'd seen. She thought of Miss Hartnell, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, and Mrs. Price, whose gossip veiled a cunning mind. Even young Clara, now missing, might be more than a frightened girl. At home, Miss Marple locked the door and spread her clues on the table. The key, the photograph, her notes. The Order of the Lark had guarded something. A relic, a secret, a key. Elizabeth Randall had been part of it, and her disappearance was no accident. The stranger had known the truth, and it had cost him his life. Clara's note about midnight, and not being safe, suggested she'd overheard something. Perhaps a name, a plan, a meeting. Miss Marple's eyes fell on the key's lark engraving. The lark sings at midnight. A signal, a meeting time. She recalled Miss Barton's tale of lights on the hill, flickering like a bird's call. Could the Order still meet under cover of night? And if so, where? She needed to test her theory, but alone she was vulnerable. The figure in the garden had seen her, and the killer was still out there. She considered confiding in Constable Reed, but hesitated. His loyalty to his sister might cloud his judgment. Instead, she resolved to watch and listen, as she always had. The village held the answer, and Miss Marple would find it, one whisper at a time. As night fell, she sat by her window, the key in her hand. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the silence was heavy. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, the lark was singing, and Miss Marple was ready to answer its call. Chapter 7. The Midnight Meeting. The clock in Miss Jane Marple's parlour struck 11, its chime a soft warning in the stillness. Outside, St. Mary Mead lay shrouded in mist, the village houses dark, save for the occasional flicker of a curtain. Miss Marple, cloaked in a black shawl, slipped the lark-edged key into her pocket and checked her torch. The stranger's words, "The lark sings at midnight," had taken on new weight since Colonel Bantry's mention of the Order of the Lark. If the society still operated, midnight was their hour, and Miss Marple intended to catch them at it. She'd chosen her destination carefully. The hill behind Rose Cottage, where wartime lights had once flickered. If the order met, it would be there, away from prying eyes. The risk was undeniable. Clara's disappearance and the stranger's murder proved the stakes. But Miss Marple's resolve was iron. Elizabeth Randall's fate, Clara's safety, and the truth demanded it. The night was cold, the mist clinging to her skin as she moved silently along the lane. Her steps were cautious, her senses sharp. She avoided the main path, cutting through the churchyard to skirt the village. The gravestones loomed like silent sentinels, and she paused by Elizabeth Randall's memorial, a small plaque barely noticeable. Gone too soon, it read. Miss Marple's throat tightened, but she pressed on. The hill was steep, its grass slick underfoot. Rose Cottage lay below, its windows dark, but Miss Marple's eyes were fixed on the crest, where a copse of oaks offered cover. She reached it just as her watch ticked toward midnight, crouching behind a gnarled trunk. Her breath was steady, her heart alert. At first there was nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, faintly, she heard it. Low whistle, short then long, like a bird's call. The lark! Her grip tightened on her torch. Shadows moved at the hill's edge, 3 figures cloaked in dark coats. They stood close, their voices hushed but urgent. "Can't risk it again," one said, a man's voice, clipped and nervous. "The old woman's sniffing around." "She's harmless," another replied, a woman, her tone sharp, "just a nosy spinster. But the girl, Clara, she's the problem." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Clara! They knew she was missing, and they feared her. "She won't talk," said the third, another man, his voice low and cold. "Not if she knows. What's good for her? The key's what matters. Without it, the vault stays locked." The first man hissed, "And if Marple finds it? She was at the cottage last night." The woman laughed, a brittle sound. "Then we deal with her, like we did the stranger." Miss Marple's blood ran cold, but her mind was racing. The key in her pocket was the prize, tied to a vault, the order protected. And they knew she'd been at Rose Cottage. Her midnight visitor had reported her. She strained to identify the voices. The woman's cadence was familiar, like Miss Hartnell's but colder. The cold-voiced man? Perhaps Mr. Grayson, the artist, whose limp matched her pursuer. The nervous one eluded her. The whistle sounded again, and the figures dispersed, melting into the mist. Miss Marple waited, her knees aching, until silence returned. She crept forward, scanning the ground where they'd stood. Her torch caught a glint, a cigarette stub still warm, marked with a faint lipstick stain. She pocketed it, her mind noting the detail. The woman smoked, and few in St. Mary Mead did. As she descended the hill, a twig snapped behind her. She spun, her torch sweeping the darkness, but saw only shadows. Her heart pounded, the vicar's warning echoing. "They're watching!" She hurried home, locking the door and drawing the curtains before examining her finds. The cigarette stub smelled faintly of jasmine, a scent she associated with Mrs. Price, the butcher's wife, who'd been so eager to gossip about the stranger. A coincidence? Miss Marple doubted it. She sat, piecing it together. The Order of the Lark guarded a vault, likely hidden since the war, its contents tied to Elizabeth Randall's disappearance. The key unlocked it, and the stranger had known where to find it. Perhaps he'd been a member, or a thief. Clara had overheard something, enough to make her flee. And the Order, still active, was ruthless, ready to kill to protect their secret. Faith, Marple's eyes fell on the photograph of Elizabeth, her cousin's smile a silent plea. The vault, the key, the lark, it all led back to her. Tomorrow she'd confront Mr. Grayson about his limp and his nocturnal habits. She'd also watch Mrs. Price, whose jasmine scent and sharp tongue might hide a darker role. As she retired, the wind rattled the windows, carrying a faint whistle like a lark's call. Miss Marple clutched the key, her resolve unshaken. The Order thought her harmless. They were wrong. Chapter 8. The Betrayal Unveiled. The morning broke with a brittle clarity. The mist of the previous night burned away by a pale sun. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, the lark-etched key and the jasmine-scented cigarette stub before her. The midnight meeting on the hill had confirmed her fears. The Order of the Lark was alive, ruthless, and aware of her meddling. Clara's name on their lips, coupled with their mention of a vault, tightened the knot of urgency in her chest. But it was the woman's voice, sharp, familiar, laced with contempt, that gnawed at her. Mrs. Price, with her gossip and jasmine perfume, was no mere bystander. Today, Miss Marple would tug that thread until it unravelled. She began at the butcher's shop, where Mrs. Price presided with her usual bustle, her smile as bright as her knives were sharp. The shop was busy, villagers queuing for sausages and exchanging whispers about Clara's absence. Miss Marple waited her turn, her eyes noting Mrs. Price's hands, steady, but with a faint tremor when a customer mentioned the stranger's death. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, her voice mild as she placed her order for a small cut of lamb. "Such a stir in the village, isn't it? First the poor man at my gate, now Clara gone. One wonders what secrets people keep." Mrs. Price's knife paused mid-slice, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple. "Secrets?" she said, her laugh forced. "Only secret here is my recipe for pork pie. Clara's probably just off with some lad. Young girls, you know." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her gaze steady. "Though she seemed frightened, didn't she? And that man, he spoke of larks and roses. Curious, don't you think?" The knife slipped, nicking Mrs. Price's finger. A bead of blood welled, and she cursed under her breath, wrapping it in a cloth. "Curious, maybe," she said, her voice tight. "But dead men don't talk, and Clara'll turn up. You worry too much, Miss Marple." Miss Marple smiled, paid, and left, but her mind was alight. Mrs. Price's reaction wasn't fear, it was guilt, thinly veiled. The jasmine scent, the cigarette stub, her presence in village gossip. She was a spider at the web's centre, and Miss Marple suspected she'd spun lies for the order. Her next stop was Rose Cottage, to confront Mr. Grayson. The artist's reclusive nature and uneven gait made him a likely candidate for the figure in the garden, and perhaps one of the midnight voices. She knocked, her heart steady despite the risk. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing Grayson's gaunt face, his eyes wary. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gravelly, "what brings you here?" "A matter of curiosity," she said, stepping inside before he could protest. The cottage smelled of turpentine and neglect, canvases stacked against the walls. "I found something near your door, a key, etched with a lark. It reminded me of the stranger's words. Do you know anything about larks, Mr. Grayson?" Chase limp was pronounced as he moved to a chair, his face a mask of irritation. "Larks? I paint landscapes, not birds. You're chasing ghosts, old woman." "Am I?" She tilted her head, her eyes sharp. "Someone was at your cottage 2 nights ago watching me. They limped like you. And last night I heard voices on the hill speaking of a vault. You wouldn't know about that, I suppose." Grayson's hand twitched, knocking a brush to the floor. "You're meddling in things you don't understand," he snapped. "Get out, or—" The door burst open, cutting him off. Constable Reed stood there, his face pale. "Miss Marple, thank God! It's Clara. She's back. Found her hiding in the church, half out of her mind. She's saying Mrs. Price tried to kill her." Miss Marple's breath caught, but she kept her composure. "Take me to her, Tom. Mr. Grayson will speak again." At the church, Clara sat huddled in a pew, her face tear-streaked, her hands trembling. The vicar hovered nearby, his expression grim. "Clara, dear," Miss Marple said, kneeling beside her, "you're safe now. Tell me what happened." Clara's voice was a whisper. "I overheard Mrs. Price at the vicarage 2 nights ago. She was on the phone, talking about the stranger, saying he'd found the key. She said they had to stop him, like they stopped Elizabeth. I ran, but she saw me. Last night she found me in the woods, tried to—" She sobbed, clutching Miss Marple's hand. "She's one of them. The order." Miss Marple's mind raced. Mrs. Price, a pillar of the village, was not just a member, but a killer, tied to Elizabeth's fate and the stranger's murder. The betrayal stung, but it fit. Her gossip masked her vigilance. Her charm hid her cruelty. The order's vault, whatever it held, was worth killing for, and Mrs. Price was its guardian. "Thank you, Clara," Miss Marple said gently. "Rest now. Tom, keep her safe. I need to speak to Mrs. Price, alone." Reed protested, but Miss Marple's resolve was unshakable. She knew the truth was close, and Mrs. Price's unravelling would lead her to the vault, and to justice for Elizabeth. As she left the church, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Miss Marple felt eyes on her, but she walked on, the key heavy in her pocket. The lark's song was nearing its crescendo, and she would not miss the final note. Chapter 9. The Key's True Purpose. The twilight draped St. Mary Mead in hues of violet and grey. The village quiet, save for the distant clatter of a cart. Miss Jane Marple moved with purpose towards the butcher's shop, the lark-etched key a cold weight in her pocket. Clara's revelation had cracked the mystery wide open. Mrs. Price, the village's gossipy matron, was not only part of the order of the Lark, but a murderer, complicit in Elizabeth Randall's fate and the stranger's death. The vault the order guarded was the heart of it all, and Miss Marple was certain the key would unlock its secrets, literal and otherwise. The shop was closed, its windows dark, but a faint light glowed from the back. Miss Marple knocked, her knock crisp and deliberate. After a moment, Mrs. Price appeared, her apron smeared with blood from the day's work, her smile tight as a drum. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice honeyed but brittle. "Bit late for shopping, isn't it?" "I'm not here for lamb," Miss Marple said, stepping inside uninvited. The air was thick with the metallic tang of meat. "I'm here about Clara and the Order of the Lark." Mrs. Price's smile vanished, her hand gripping the counter. "Clara's a silly girl, spinning tales. You shouldn't listen to her." "Shouldn't I?" Miss Marple's eyes were steel. "She heard you, Mrs. Price, talking about the stranger, the key, and Elizabeth Randall. You tried to silence her, just as you silenced him. And my cousin, all those years ago." The butcher's wife paled, her knuckles whitening. "You're meddling in things you can't understand," she hissed. "Elizabeth was a fool, and so was that man. They threatened everything." "Everything?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "You mean the vault, don't you? The Order's secret, hidden since the war. What is it, Mrs. Price? A weapon? A list of traitors? Or something older? Something worth killing for?" Mrs. Price laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You think you're clever, don't you? That key you're clutching, it's nothing without the vault, and you'll never find it." Miss Marple's hand slipped into her pocket, closing around the key. "I already have," she said softly, "and I know where to look. Rose Cottage, under the rose. The vault's there, isn't it? That's why you watch the place, why you meet at midnight." Mrs. Price lunged, faster than Miss Marple expected, her hand snatching a cleaver from the counter. But Miss Marple was ready, stepping back and raising her torch like a shield. "Don't be foolish," she said, her voice calm. "Clara's safe, and Constable Reed knows everything. Harm me, and you're finished." The cleaver trembled in Mrs. Price's hand, her eyes wild. Then, abruptly, she dropped it, her shoulders slumping. "It's too late," she whispered. "The Order's bigger than me. They'll come for you, Marple. For the key, for the vault." "Tell me about the vault," Miss Marple pressed. "What's inside?" Mrs. Price's gaze darted to the door, as if expecting rescue or pursuit. "It's a relic," she said at last, her voice low. "From the war. A cipher device, one of a kind. The Nazis wanted it. The Allies hid it. Elizabeth was supposed to guard it, but she betrayed us, tried to sell it to a German agent. We stopped her. The stranger. He was her contact's son, come to finish what she started. Miss Marple's heart sank, but her mind stayed sharp. Elizabeth, her cousin, a traitor. It hurt, but it fit. The photograph, the secrecy, her disappearance, and the vault, she asked. Where is it? Mrs. Price's lips twisted. Under Rose Cottage, in the cellar. The key opens the lock, but you'll need more than that. The Order's watching, and they don't forgive. A noise outside, a footstep, heavy and deliberate, made them both freeze. Mrs. Price's eyes widened in terror. "They're here," she whispered. "Run, Marple, or you're dead." Miss Marple didn't hesitate. She slipped out the back door, her torch off, her steps silent in the gathering dark. Behind her she heard a muffled cry, then silence. She didn't look back. Mrs. Price had made her choices, and Miss Marple had her own to make. At home, she locked the door and sat, the key glinting under her lamp. The vault was real, its contents a cipher device that could still shift the balance of power, or fetch a fortune on the black market. Elizabeth's betrayal explained her fate, but not the Order's ruthlessness. Who else was involved? Grayson, with his limp, the vicar, with his guilt. And what of the figure outside silencing Mrs. Price? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The vault awaited, and with it the truth. Tomorrow she'd go to Rose Cottage, key in hand, and face whatever lay beneath. The lark's song was nearing its end, and she would sing the final note. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The dawn over St. Mary Mead was a pale, reluctant thing, the sky streaked with clouds that mirrored Miss Jane Marple's resolve, steady, unyielding, but shadowed by what lay ahead. The lark-edged key rested in her handbag, alongside the photograph of Elizabeth Randall, whose betrayal had set this deadly chain in motion. Mrs. Price's confession had laid bare the stakes. A cipher device, hidden in a vault beneath Rose Cottage, guarded by the Order of the Lark. Her sudden silence last night, cut short by an unseen assailant, confirmed the Order's desperation. Today, Miss Marple would end it. She enlisted Constable Reed, whose loyalty to his sister Clara outweighed his inexperience. Over tea, she outlined her plan. They would enter Rose Cottage, find the vault, and secure the cipher device before the Order could act. Reed's face was grim, his trust in the village shaken by Mrs. Price's treachery. "What if they're waiting for us?" he asked. "Then we'll be ready," Miss Marple said, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp. "But I suspect they're rattled. Mrs. Price's death has cost them a leader. We must move quickly." They approached Rose Cottage under a drizzle. The village hushed. The door was ajar, a sign of recent intrusion. Inside, the air was stale, the furniture undisturbed, except for a rug in the corner, slightly askew. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers probing the floorboards beneath. A faint click revealed a trapdoor. its edges etched with a faint rose pattern. The key fit perfectly, the lock turning with a heavy thud. The cellar was damp, its walls lined with crates and shadows. At its centre stood a steel door, unremarkable save for a lark emblem at its lock. Miss Marple inserted the key, and the door swung open, revealing a small chamber. On a pedestal sat the cipher device, a compact brass machine, its dials and gears gleaming despite decades of dust. Beside it lay a ledger, its pages yellowed. Reed whistled softly. "That's it. Looks like a typewriter had a baby with a clock." "It's more than that," Miss Marple said, scanning the ledger. Names, dates, codes, evidence of the Order's wartime operations and its post-war vigilance. Elizabeth's name appeared, marked with a single word, traitor. But another name caught her eye, Henry Clement. The vicar. Before she could process it, a shadow filled the doorway. Mr. Grayson, his limp pronounced, held a pistol, his face twisted with rage. "You couldn't leave it alone, could you?" he snarled. "The Order's work is bigger than you, Marple." Reed lunged, but Grayson was faster, his gun trained on Miss Marple. "Don't," she said calmly, raising a hand. "Mr. Grayson, you're protecting a relic that's already cost too much. Elizabeth the stranger, Mrs. Price, how many more?" "It's not about the machine," Grayson spat. "It's about loyalty. Elizabeth betrayed us, tried to sell the cipher to the enemy. We stopped her, and we'll stop anyone who threatens us." "And Clara?" Miss Marple pressed. "She was no threat, just a frightened girl." Grayson's eyes flickered. "Clara was a mistake. Price overreacted. But you're the real danger." A second figure emerged from the shadows. Mr. Clement, the vicar, his face etched with guilt. "Enough, Grayson," he said, his voice weary. "It's over. Jane, I'm sorry. I tried to warn you." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her voice remained steady. "Henry, you're part of this. The Order, Elizabeth's death, all of it." Clement nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I was young, in love with her. When she betrayed us, I didn't stop them. I've carried that shame ever since. When the stranger came, asking questions, I knew the past was waking. I tried to stay silent, but Grayson and Price, they wouldn't let it go." Grayson's gun wavered. "Shut up, Clement. The Order's all that matters." "No," Miss Marple said, stepping forward, her eyes locked on his. "The Order's a shadow, clinging to a war long over. You killed for it, but it's done. Put the gun down, or Reed will have you." Reed, poised behind Grayson, nodded. Grayson's hand shook, then dropped, the pistol clattering to the floor. Reed cuffed him, his face tight with anger. Miss Marple turned to Clement. "Henry, you'll tell the truth, all of it. For Elizabeth, for Clara, for the stranger." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I will, Jane. I owe her that." As Reed led Grayson away, Miss Marple lifted the cipher device, its weight heavy with history. The ledger would expose the Order's sins, and Clement's confession would seal their fate. but the victory felt hollow, stained by Elizabeth's betrayal and the lives lost to keep it buried. Outside the rain had stopped, the air fresh. Miss Marple clutched the photograph, her cousin's smile a bittersweet echo. The vault was open, the truth laid bare. But one question lingered, sharp and unyielding. Had Elizabeth truly betrayed them, or was there more to her story? Chapter 11. The Twist of the Lark. The evening settled over St. Mary Mead with a quiet that felt earned, the village's usual hum subdued by the day's revelations. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the cipher device and its ledger locked in a box for the authorities, the lark-etched key on her table. Mr. Grayson was in custody, his confession implicating the remnants of the Order of the Lark. The vicar, Mr. Clement, had turned himself in, his tearful account of Elizabeth Randall's death painting a grim picture of wartime zeal and post-war paranoia. Clara was safe, shaken but recovering. Yet Miss Marple's mind was restless, caught on a single thread: Elizabeth's betrayal. The ledger's cold label, traitor, didn't sit right. Her cousin had been reckless, yes, but disloyal. Miss Marple wasn't convinced. She reopened the ledger, its pages brittle under her fingers. The Order's records were meticulous. Coded messages, rendezvous points, names of operatives. Elizabeth's entries were frequent until mid-1942, when they stopped abruptly, replaced by a terse note: ER, compromised, neutralized. But a faint pencil mark caught Miss Marple's eye, nearly erased, on the ledger's final page. Lark's truth lies with the rose's shadow. It was in Elizabeth's hand. She recognized the looping L from childhood letters. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The rose again. She'd assumed it referred to Rose Cottage's carving, but what if it meant something else? She recalled the cottage's cellar, its walls bare except for a shadowed corner she hadn't examined. The lark's truth, Elizabeth's truth, was still hidden. She acted swiftly, phoning Constable Reed to meet her at Rose Cottage. "Bring a crowbar, Tom," she said, "and hurry." The night was dark, the village asleep, but Miss Marple's senses were alight as they entered the cottage, the trap-door creaking under their weight. In the cellar, she directed Reed to the shadowed corner. "There," she said, pointing to a cracked stone wall. Reed pried at it, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small tin box, its lid engraved with a rose. Miss Marple opened it, her hand steady despite the weight of anticipation. The box held a single document, folded and sealed with wax. It was a letter, addressed to Jane Marple in Elizabeth's hand. Miss Marple's breath caught as she broke the seal and read, "Dear Jane, if you're reading this, you've found the truth the Order buried. I was no traitor. The cipher device was a decoy, a lure to trap a German agent posing as one of us. I played the traitor to draw him out, but the Order misunderstood. They killed me before I could explain, thinking I'd betrayed them. The real cipher, the one that matters, is safe, hidden where the lark's shadow falls at midnight. Forgive Henry. He loved me, but fear blinded him. Protect the truth, Jane. You always saw what others missed. Yours, Elizabeth. Miss Marple's eyes stung, her cousin's voice vivid in the words. Elizabeth hadn't betrayed the order. She'd sacrificed herself to protect it, only to be misjudged and murdered. The ledger's label was a lie, born of wartime panic. And the real cipher device, the true secret, was still out there. Miss Marple? Reed's voice was soft, concerned. What does it mean? It means we've been chasing the wrong secret, she said, folding the letter. The device we found was a fake, meant to mislead. Elizabeth hid the real one, and the order killed her for it. We need to find it before anyone else does. Reed frowned. Where's where the lark's shadow falls at midnight? Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing it together. The hill behind Rose Cottage, where the order met, was the lark's domain. At midnight, the moon's light would cast shadows from the oaks. She recalled a stone marker there, half buried, shaped vaguely like a lark. The hill, she said. Tonight, Tom. We finish this. Under moonlight, they climbed the hill, the marker glinting faintly. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers probing the earth. Beneath the stone, she found another box, this one heavy, its lock matching the lark key. Inside was the true cipher device, a sleek, intricate machine, its dials marked with symbols no decoy could mimic. A note tucked beside it read, "For the Allies, not the Order." E.R. Miss Marple exhaled, the weight of decades lifting. Elizabeth's sacrifice was vindicated, her truth restored. The Order's last secret was hers to protect now. As they descended, Reed carrying the device, Miss Marple glanced at the stars. The twist, the lark's truth, had redefined everything. Elizabeth wasn't the villain, but the hero, and the Order's zeal had been their downfall. The final piece was in place, and justice, at last, was served. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, as if the village itself were exhaling after weeks of secrets and shadows. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, a cup of tea warming her hands, the lark-etched key now a quiet relic on her table. The true cipher device, Elizabeth Randall's final gift to the Allies, was in the hands of Colonel Bantry's contacts in military intelligence, its significance to be studied far from the village's prying eyes. The ledger and Elizabeth's letter had been turned over to the authorities, ensuring the order of the Lark's surviving members. Mr. Grayson and Mr. Clement would face justice for their crimes. Clara Reed, recovering at home, was safe, her courage a quiet triumph. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Elizabeth, her cousin whose bravery had been buried under decades of lies. The letter, now tucked in her keepsake box, was a testament to a woman who'd outwitted a German agent only to fall to her own allies' fear. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her heart heavy but at peace. Elizabeth's truth was restored, her sacrifice honoured. It was enough. Constable Reed visited at noon, his face lighter than she'd seen in days. "It's over, Miss Marple," he said, settling on a garden chair. "Grayson's talking, named 2 others in the order, small players, already picked up. Mr. Clements confessed everything, says he wants to atone. The village, well, it's reeling, as it should," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. "Secrets like these fester, Tom, but truth, however painful, heals." Reed nodded, then hesitated. "Clara told me something odd. She overheard Mrs. Price mention a rose's shadow before she ran. Said it sounded like a person, not a place. Any idea what she meant?" Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, then softened. "A person," she mused. "Perhaps Elizabeth herself. She was the rose's shadow, hidden, misunderstood, but casting light. In the end, Clara's sharper than she knows." Reed smiled a rare warmth. "You're sharper than all of us, Miss Marple. If you hadn't pushed, we'd never have found the truth." She waved a hand, her smile modest. "I only listen, Tom. People tell their stories, if you know how to hear them." After he left, Miss Marple walked to the churchyard, pausing at Elizabeth's memorial. The plaque was simple, but she imagined adding a line. "Hero, not traitor." She touched the stone, her fingers lingering. "You did well, Elizabeth," she whispered. "Rest now." Back home she resumed her knitting, the rhythm soothing. The village would talk for weeks about the stranger, the order, the vault. But St. Mary Mead would endure, as it always did. Miss Marple's role would fade into whispers, her sharpness cloaked in her spinster's guise. She preferred it that way. As dusk fell, a lark sang somewhere beyond the garden, its notes clear and fleeting. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. The mystery was solved, the twist unveiled, the resolution complete. Justice had prevailed, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. And in St. Mary Mead, that was victory enough. Epilogue. The Lark's Last Note. 3 weeks had passed since the truth of the Order of the Lark was laid bare, and St. Mary Mead had settled into a cautious normalcy. The butcher's shop stood shuttered, Mrs. Price's absence a wound the village gossips probed with relish. Mr. Grayson's trial loomed in the county court, while Mr. Clement, the vicar, had resigned, retreating to a quiet life of penance in a distant parish. The cipher device, its secrets now safely archived, was a footnote in military history. Its wartime power faded, but its story enduring. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a letter from Colonel Bantry open on her lap. He'd written with his usual bluff warmth, confirming the cipher's authenticity and praising her damnable cleverness. Enclosed was a photograph, newly discovered in wartime archives. Elizabeth Randall, laughing with a group of resistance fighters, her eyes bright with purpose. Miss Marple traced her cousin's face, a smile tugging at her lips. Elizabeth's legacy was secure, no longer a traitor, but a hero. Her name whispered with respect in the halls of intelligence. The village, too, was healing. Clara Reed had returned to the vicarage, her courage bolstered by Miss Marple's quiet encouragement. She'd even begun a journal, chronicling the events to ensure the truth lived on. Constable Reed, promoted for his role, stopped by often, his gratitude unspoken but clear in the extra scones he brought from his mother's kitchen. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts often returned to the rose's shadow, Elizabeth's phrase, which Clara had overheard. She'd been right to call it a person, not a place. Elizabeth had cast a long shadow, her sacrifice shaping the village's fate decades later. But there was another shadow, one Miss Marple hadn't shared, herself. Her relentless pursuit of truth, her refusal to let the past lie, had been the rose's mirror, reflecting Elizabeth's courage back into the light. On a crisp November morning, Miss Marple visited the churchyard once more. She'd arranged for a small addition to Elizabeth's memorial, funded quietly through Colonel Bantry's contacts. The plaque now read, Elizabeth Randall, 1920–1942, hero of the lark, restored. She laid a single rose at its base, its petals vivid against the stone. As she walked home, a lark sang overhead, its notes soaring above the village. Miss Marple paused, her eyes lifting to the sky. The bird was invisible, its song a fleeting gift, like truth itself, elusive, fragile, but undeniable when found. She thought of Elizabeth, of the stranger, of the secrets that had bound them. The lark's last note lingered, then faded, and Miss Marple smiled. In St. Mary Mead, life would go on. Teas, scandals, whispers. But for those who listened, the lark's song would always carry a truth worth hearing. And Miss Marple, with her knitting and her quiet eyes, would always be there to hear it.